A very good morning to all of you. In my previous lecture, I started with Partha Chatterjee's essay, Whose Imagined Community. We understood that it is an answer to the book written by Benedict Anderson on Imagined Community, wherein he talks about the idea of nationalism and all. And he comes up with the observation that it is not race or religion or language that determines the nationalism. Rather, it is a kind of imagination of the group of people. However, Partha Chatterjee has certain objections to the argument put forth by Benedict Anderson. Benedict Anderson's book was published in the year 1985, and then he comes up with a central objection to Anderson's argument, and he thinks that that cannot be applicable to the anti-colonial resistance and post-colonial uh, countries because they have to they don't have anything to imagine because the model is provided by the European and American countries. Okay, it asserts that Europe and the Americas are the only two subjects of history, and they only have brought everything, means the changes, the enlightenment, everything. And the anti-colonial subject does do not have any space for imagination or their own subjectivity as such. Then he comes up with the objection to Anderson's argument. He states that it is not for any sentimental reason. There is a logic in his objection, and he refers to the most creative results and most powerful results of nationalist imagination in Asia and Africa, which emerged at the resistance to the colonial powers. So, how can we ignore this without reducing the experience of anti-colonial nationalism? You cannot consider it as something which is out of use or dead body. So he thinks that it is not only Anderson, but there are many others to be blamed. Okay, and the difficulty arises because we have all taken the claims of nationalism to be political movement. Okay, this particular claim is taken very seriously and literally. So that is the problem. And then he refers to India as an example, as an instance. In India, he says, any standard nationalist history will tell us that nationalism proper began in the year 1885. And this was with the formation of the Indian National Congress. Okay, but prior to that as well, before a decade or so, the decade preceding this was a period of preparation. So, in several provincial political associations, kingdoms and all, provinces were there, you might be knowing. For example, Bombay Presidency or what we call the Madras Presidency, Mysore Presidency, Gwalior, such kind of Indore, etc. Presidencies were there. So in these provincial regions, many associations were formed. And even before that, from the year 1820s to the 1870s, he refers to it as the period of social reform. So you must be knowing something about Rajaram Mohan Roy and other social reformers in Maharashtra, such as Ranade, then Phule, etc. Mahatma Phule, we call him. So these movements, social reform, had started in India during that period. So you cannot underestimate these reforms and the social reformers in India or Maharashtra. So we refer to Vinoba Bhave, Dondo Keshav Karve. Okay, during that period, I'm trying to talk about the initial period of this movement, Mahatma Phule in the field of education. So all these social movements he refers to. Then what he says, when the colonial enlightenment was beginning to modernize. Enlightenment means the knowledge was spreading across different colonial countries. You might be knowing, for example, Western knowledge was inspiring the scholars in India and other parts of the world. So, when colonial enlightenment was beginning to modernize the customs and institutions of a traditional society, this was the period of social reform. You talk about Sati and all, Sati system. Rajaram Mohan Roy in Bengal worked against this system. And Mahatma Phule fought for the education of women. So you know it all very well. He also fought for the remarriage of widows and all, widow remarriages. So this was the period of enlightenment. Actually, the source of inspiration was the Western scholarship, the Western knowledge. This was just like the period of Renaissance. The revival of learning was taking place the way it happened during the 16th and 17th century in Europe, especially in England, France, etc. Similarly, it was happening in India as well during the 19th century. You can see that during the early and late 19th century, the changes were taking place, the reformations were taking place, and these reformations, social reformations, were modernizing the customs and institutions of traditional society, Indian society, and even it was enlightening the political spirit. So when we talk about this, this was very much that of collaboration with the colonial regime. And during this period, nationalism had still not emerged. You have to underline that fact. We were not fighting as Indians. Nationalism was not a dominant phenomena as such. It happened after 1885. So during the preparation was going on, anyhow, we can say. When we talk about this history and we analyze this history from the sociological point of view, it goes closer to Anderson's formulations. It goes closer to Anderson's idea of nationalism. He agreed it has to be submitted, it has to be agreed. The analysis, sociological analysis, cannot but converse with Anderson's formulations, means they go closer to Anderson's idea of nationalism. In fact, he says this particular movement replicate. To replicate means to what we call imitate its own history, the history of the modern state in Europe. So we can, I mentioned it, what was happening during the 16th and 17th century was happening in India during the late 19th century. Early 19th, it started in the early 19th century and it was happening up to the middle of the 19th century. So this was the period of social reform. So it was the kind of replication of the European history. And nationalism's self-representations will inevitably corroborate Anderson's decoding of the nationalist myth. It agrees with actually whatever ideas were presented by Anderson regarding nationalism. So it was a kind of decoding. I am sure that you are familiar with the term in semantics, encoding and decoding. For example, I'm trying to decode what is being said by Partha Chatterjee. So the speaker encodes and the listener decodes. You are trying to decode me. Okay? So decoding was taking place. Means what? Anderson's idea of nationalism was in tune with whatever was happening in India. So he thinks, Partha Chatterjee thinks that as history, nationalism's autobiography is fundamentally flawed. You are well familiar with the fact that history is having full of flaws. History has flaws, its own limitations. Same in the case of the story of nationalism. It is a kind of autobiography and it has certain limitations as well, just like history. So he refers to his own reading. By my reading, Partha Chatterjee says, anti colonial nationalism, the nationalism that took place in India against the colonial power of Britain, this was in African countries, whichever countries, wherever anti colonial nationalism took place, it creates its own domain of sovereignty. Sovereignty means the Marathi term for sovereignty is Sarvabhaumya. It has its own existence, it has its own sovereignty within colonial society. Means in India or in other part of the world, wherever colonies were there, it has its own anti-colonial nationalism. Means those who listen to radio, they must be knowing something about Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav. Every morning, we'll come across kind of information about the movement that was taking place in different villages in different parts of the India, I mean to say. So today only there was a reference to, I think, the movement in Indapur. When I was coming to the college, in my car, I happened to hear that the radio, wherein there was a mention to the movement against the British rule in Indapur. So such kind of movements were starting, had started in India and other such colonial countries. So, what we understand that nationalism, especially anti-colonial nationalism, creates its own domain of sovereignty within colonial society, well before it begins its political battle with the imperial power. For example, the National Indian Congress started with the political battle, but prior to that, this was happening. The resistance were taking place. So many tribes, you might be knowing, resisted the British rule, the East India Company. Therefore, these tribes were declared as the criminal tribes by the British government. They were notified during that period, before the formation of the National Indian National Congress in the year 1895. In the year 1873 or so, the British government declared what we call the Criminal Tribes Act. Okay, Criminal Tribes Act was the act against the it was in 1871. I'm sorry for the date. I said 1873. It is 1871. So the British government, the erstwhile British colonial government, declared this act to curb the resistance by the local tribes by declaring them as habitual criminals, because many of the rich people, the aristocratic people, were in favor of British government. These tribes which resisted the British colonial rule government were declared as criminals. They were, declared as habitual criminals. Means those who commit crimes by birth. For example, you might be knowing Parthi community. Means these communities were declared criminals because of the British government, because these communities were not ready to succumb to the British rules. So that was the reason. Fine. So this particular movement was taking place, and this particular resistance, the battle to against the imperial power, was going on, and this happened in two different domains. So he divides the world of social institutions and practices into two domains. First, the material and the spiritual. These are the two domains that he refers to. Now, what is the material domain? The material is the domain of the outside. of the economy and statecraft. He refers to the economic system, the political system, the government system of science and technology. And in this domain, of course, the West was superior. It had proved its superiority. Even today, we appreciate the Western countries for their economy, for their statecraft, for their governments, for the development in science and technology. Even today, they are superior. And the East had succumbed. The East had surrendered to this superiority. No development, economic or scientific or technological development took place in the East. So, in terms of the first domain, the material domain, the West was the best, we can say. So East is the best, that song I remember, but West was the best in terms of all these things. I think East or West India is the best. That is the song I remembered here. But what I'm trying to say was that I was trying to say that science and technology, in terms of the development in science and technology, in terms of economic development, West was always superior and has been superior, we can say. The East was nowhere. In this domain, Western superiority had to be acknowledged. You can't deny that. And its accomplishments carefully studied and replicated. We have to study these accomplishments, the success of the Western countries in terms of economy, in terms of statecraft, in terms of science and technology, and we have to imitate them. Everyone says the same. We have to imitate the best from the West. The spiritual, of course, the second domain that he refers to, on the other hand, is an inner domain. It is not outside domain. Something it is within oneself, bearing the essential marks of cultural identity. And this domain had its own cultural identity. The greater one's success in imitating Western skills in the material domain, therefore, the greater the need to preserve the distinctness of one's spiritual culture. Of course, he does not object imitating Western culture for its material domain. But at the same time, we have to preserve. We have to preserve means to store something, to archive something, to maintain something, special culture, a distinctiveness. Means we are distinct. The East is distinct from the West in terms of the spiritual culture, and that is what one should follow. And this formula, he says, a fundamental feature of anti-colonial nationalism in Asia and Africa. In both Asia and Africa, this formula was adopted. Means in terms of social reforms, in terms of technical reforms, we looked at the West. But at the same time, we took pride in maintaining our cultural distinctiveness, our spiritual culture. Not only in Asia, not only in India, I'm talking about it happened in Asia and Africa, and there are several implications. Implications means outcomes, we can say here, means something which you can see, and he talks about these implications in the next part of the discussion. I shall be talking about it in the next lecture, in the next part of our lecture.